Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So in this video I'd like to show you the Vault of Stars, but from a tanking perspective. So this will be an overall guide of how to actually tank this dungeon successfully so that your allies do not die unnecessarily. So initially you just have a group of mobs before the portal, where then you'll have to go into this grove, protect this guy, and you'll have all of these mobs which you'll again have to kill, and they'll become in waves and you'll just have more and more of them, and after a few minutes after killing them all you then proceed onwards. Well, in this specific area the most dangerous mobs you'll have to look out for are those nasty archers. They can deal up to like 600,000 damage on a crit, even to you as a tank with like 70% awareness and 90% defense. So those are the guys you really have to watch out for, and they can pretty much one-shot a DPS if you're not careful and if they aren't dodging. So make sure you grab their attention and their aggro as quickly as possible so they start hitting you rather than your allies, and that's pretty much it. Then when you proceed onwards you'll notice these corpse flowers will spawn on the outer edges of the pathway that you're continuing on, and these corpse flowers you want to kill as quickly as possible as they will keep spawning mobs, more and more of them. So as a tank you can just go beside them, aggro all the mobs and just tank them there. Meanwhile the DPS will just do their AoE powers and finish them off, and that's pretty much it. You just kill a bunch of mobs and proceed onwards through these areas, finally getting to the first boss, the Gardener. Now this boss has a few various mechanics, especially ones you need to keep an eye out for as the tank. Initially you will get a small area proccing on you with a double arrow downwards. You can literally just leave it where you stand, but then you need to move out of the area and tank the boss in a different place and make sure that there's not one of those mushroom patches behind the boss so that the DPS can stand behind him. After about 15 seconds or so, the boss will teleport to the outer edge of the platform. These corpse flowers will spawn in the center and there'll be all these mobs. Try and aggro the mobs and make sure that they don't deal unnecessary damage to the DPS. You also may want to intercept the green line that the Gardener puts on one of the flowers so the flower doesn't grow big. After that you'll get a large area which will spawn on you. You can literally just tank it, there's not much you can do, but after the boss has done that green line and he's gone back, you will notice he will hit you pretty hard, so make sure you're full HP before he comes back at you, and that way you won't die from that big hit. You can use your dig in or your tab power if you wish to do so. So otherwise the boss doesn't really do a whole lot of damage. Just keep moving those mushrooms to the outer edges and making sure that they don't deal unnecessary damage to you and that you're not standing in some unnecessary areas. Don't intercept the wide red line that the boss does. That wants to be put so that it hits actually one of the flowers and not anybody else. So if you've got it on you, make sure you position a flower between you and the boss. And the green line, always make sure to intercept it. Then at 50%, Nagoth will spawn. This is the displacer beast, and he will stun an enemy and create a line between him and the boss. You need to intercept this line ASAP. It will do pretty heavy AoE damage around you of the person who intercepts it, so make sure you move away from everybody else. So he does this mechanic numerous amount of times. He'll effectively jump on top of somebody, stun them, start basically eating them, and you need to go and intercept the line of where the boss spawns on the outside. You should be able to see the line fairly easily. Make sure you try and block the damage. It's not too much, and you should be able to get by just tanking it away from the party members, make sure you're not unnecessarily killing them. If you fail to block the line, then it'll just kill everybody who's near the boss, and that generally be most of the DPS. After about 50% or so, the boss will like jump at you, then teleport behind you, creating another of itself, a duplicate basically. This can be rather a bit confusing, but you just have to keep positioning yourself. You will get some of these mushroom patches that will spawn. Make sure to move them continually to the outside so that you're not fighting within them and unnecessarily taking a lot of damage. So you can generally get this boss killed pretty easily. Just make sure you do your job and intercept those lines. Then the boss, when you've killed that one, will spawn back in, creating those corpse flowers again, and it'll just have the same rotations again, moving those mushrooms to the outer edge and make sure you don't tank within them. He'll teleport to the outside. Again, he will always make that big hit on you after he's done his two mechanics of the green line and the wide red line, and you might get this big AoE on you, and this AoE you'll just have to tank it as well. Try and group up the mobs whenever he does those mechanics and the boss isn't hitting you. Try and aggro them initially so that you get their attention rather than the DPS. So this boss overall fairly simple enough, just lots of mobs you want to aggro and make sure you have their attention. I like to run a lightning enchantment here, it just helps to make sure you have the aggro on the mobs. Whenever the boss is doing those mechanics on the outside of the arena, I generally jump into the middle and start swinging with my at-will just to aggro some of those mobs. And then you just generally tank the boss near the middle so that any AoE DPS will also affect the boss. So yeah, that's pretty much it. After you've killed the boss, you need to navigate through this forest following this light. It will last for about 5 minutes. Make sure you have your AoE aggro power slotted and just follow the light and keep up with everybody else, making sure to hold the aggro where possible. There's nothing special here whatsoever. But then you get over to the second boss, and here you will have the Prince of Frost. Now in my opinion, he's actually the easiest boss to beat as long as you play the mechanics right. He doesn't have many tricky things that's with him. He'll just have this arc of red which he will make, and he'll blast ice outwards. Try not to stand in it as you will receive a vulnerability debuff. Make sure to just keep his aggro and group up beside the boss whenever somebody gets the hypo, and that way everybody knows where to be, just beside the boss. Occasionally somebody will get an AoE with arrow downwards, they will just move it to the outside and they'll get frozen in ice. As tank, you kind of want to tank him on the outer edge. At the beginning, you can generally just fight him in the middle, but afterwards you want to go moving to the outside. This is about at 75%. And the reason being is that he will create these AoEs on everybody, and you kind of want to coordinate together, move together, make one spot all iced after those drop, and then tank the boss kind of either clockwise or anti-clockwise as I'm doing here. Somebody gets frozen ice, give them some room to place it closer to the other ice, and then that way you'll always have room when you go around together, creating just the ice in the same spot like behind the boss, and then just moving away again. Here we get the AoEs again, we move them over here, I drop them and run back, and I'm pulling the boss here to the side, and that way they have enough room again. We get the arcs, apparently he didn't move, and I got the vulnerability. You can see I have it up there. It's nothing too much to worry about. This boss doesn't really do a whole lot of damage, and I don't believe he's going to be buffed up or anything to do anymore, so you should be fine. And as you can see there, we get the AoEs again. We just move them to the side, drop them, and run back. We're going anti-clockwise here around in a circle, but that's just fairly straightforward. Make sure to move out of those arcs, break anybody out of ice if that so happens. I believe somebody was stuck in the red there. We managed to break them out just in time before they die. That's this boss. Once he gets to 25%, he'll start doing more mechanics much quicker. Make sure always to group up for the hypo, and always to move those red areas away from the boss. And the boss will generally follow you as the tank, so it's up to you to make sure he's in the right position at the right times. So that's going to be this boss. He's the most straightforward boss there is, and we move then to the maze. Now the maze is like a time check. You have to get through these 3 arenas where you have lots of mobs, and before moving on to the next, and you have to get through all of the arenas with a timer, that encroaching darkness bar. Again, you have these annoying pesky archers who will do pretty lethal damage. Make sure you have the aggro on them, and after a period of time these flowers will spawn on the outer edge and they will start spawning those mobs. It can be a bit uncoordinated here of which places to go to actually get the aggro, as everybody will all spread out. but try to just get the aggro on most of the mobs, on those groups. As a paladin tank, it's very straightforward there, just using Templar's Wrath to get that initial big damage. Some people would say to use Bane, but I say Templar's Wrath is a whole lot better because it has that increased threat, and it has a multiplier of 8, meaning whatever damage you deal with it is multiplied by an effective value of 8, and that way the enemies think you dealt a whole lot more damage than you did. Then you proceed on with the maze. Now the trick to the maze is you always want to move right. You move right and you go and you fight the group of mobs there, and you go through the doorway. You go through the doorway that is to the right. Sometimes you will be split up. It's very annoying when you and the healer are split up together. I don't know why my FPS in this part is pretty bad, but you keep moving together. Try regroup up in the second area after going through the first door. You should both be able to do so. Sometimes one of you will be alone like we had initially, and then you want to go and you will save him. Basically, you go to each of the doors, and whoever has the light after going into the second area, the light will go beside the door. It will follow one of you, and when it goes beside the door, it will shine up yellow if it's the right doorway, and it will stay purple if it's the wrong doorway. Anyway, we save our ally, and then we go and we run backwards, and we enter into the second arena. And this is basically the maze. You continue on doing the exact same. You get to the final third arena and you beat up all the mobs here. You'll again get the same phases with lots of mobs beforehand. Then you get the corpse flowers. At this point with the third arena, you might get these void areas that will move around on the ground. Make sure to continually move out of them, as you'll take damage over time, and it'll also slow you, making it very annoying. So after you've killed everything here, then you need to go to the walled off section. You run through quickly and you come to these 3 shambling mounds. You want to make sure you kill these as quickly as possible, and then you need to run up the steps and activate the light. As a tank, you're mainly like the leader, so you'll be up front most of the time as long as they're not all running ahead of you. But you still ideally want to be ahead of everybody because you want to take that aggro first. But that's it, you've got to the third boss. Now the third boss is like 3 mini bosses, one at a time. The first 2 are fairly straightforward. Basically he will say, the golem will announce as he spawns in, preserved by darkness, and then you want to make sure he's in the light to damage him. You always want to keep moving him. The light areas will always move across the arena to where the golems are all standing like immobilized where they initially spawn in, and when he says sheltered by starlight, make sure you move him into the darkness to be able to damage him, and that's basically your duty as the tank. Hold the aggro on the boss to use whatever powers you need to. They don't particularly do a whole lot of damage. Make sure to move out of those red arcs when you can, and always make sure he's in the right area. If he's not in the right area, your allies will take a lot of damage by their attacks being reflected. And there we've killed the first golem, and he explodes and creates an area of light which you all need to shelter in, and then it'll be about 20 seconds or so before you'll fight the second one. So make sure you try and get your action points up before the next golem. The second golem is pretty much exactly the same. Initially you want to make sure he's in the light, and then at 50% HP you want to make sure he's in the dark. However, I believe it's timed. It's not actually based on the HP he has. So just keep aware and make sure you have your audio on, or you're paying attention to what he says and those damage markers. If you start seeing shield markers, make sure you move him into the other type of area. With the yellow areas or the light areas, you always want to be on the edge at which it's moving so that the boss always stays within the light. Sometimes he will do mechanics where he will stand still and he'll just do the mechanic. So for that time you want to make sure he's still within the light and that he still will remain to do so. Ideally you'll just move him to the edge and then he'll do his mechanics, and then you'll move him back to the edge again, making sure he's always in it. The dark portals, generally they aren't moving about. Anyway, we've killed the second one, and now we have the third golem, the third and final one. Now this golem can be a bit more tricky, especially as the tank, because you need to try and move him into these certain areas. But this third boss will spawn these black holes. which will effectively slow you down so much and like suck you in. As a tank, we generally have a bit more control resistance, so it can be a little bit easier for us. So just keep moving him about and try avoid those black holes, moving away from them. So it can be really annoying, especially if you're a melee tank like a fighter. As a paladin, it's much more easier because we have our smite and we can be at a distance and we can hard taunt. So holding aggro for us is a lot easier. Those black holes can be a pain in the ass. If you're stuck in like the red area and the black holes just sucking you about, it can be very annoying to be able to get out of it. But overall, you'll get the hang of it. Those black holes, yeah, they'll be so annoying along with the hypo. Generally, as the tank, don't really worry about the hypo too much. Just give combat advantage and make damn sure the boss is in the right spot. The boss isn't in the right spot, everybody just takes unnecessary amounts of damage and they'll just end up dying more times than necessary because of it. So as long as the boss is in the right area, either dark or light, depending on which he said. When he says preserved by darkness, make sure he's in the light. Sheltered by starlight, make sure he's in the dark. And so on, and that's pretty much it. And hopefully it goes just as well for you. It will take quite some time to actually learn the mechanics, maybe a few runs, maybe a good few tries on each boss, but you'll get the gist of it. As long as your character's up to par and you know what you're doing, you'll be grand. None of the bosses actually deal too much damage. There isn't really any like big massive hits you need to watch out for. At least that's what I've experienced. And it's all very straightforward and not too challenging whatsoever. Maybe it's a whole lot more challenging on a lower geared character, but as an end game character with pretty much everything maxed, it seems just fine and dandy. So hopefully this has been at least somewhat helpful for you tanks and on how to actually tank this new dungeon. This new module will be coming out in less than a week, and with it we can potentially start farming this dungeon. However, with the way the campaign is set up, I'm unsure exactly still how we're going to be able to unlock it, as we've only been able to see what milestone 1 of the actual campaign. Anyway, hopefully I presented this well, and if I did, consider leaving the video a like, and if you're new around here, consider subscribing, and we'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.